Picture a charming small town, Willowbrook, where everyone knows each other and life seems like it's straight out of a fairy tale. At the heart of this town stands the Sweet Redemption Bakery, a place that has been the center of celebrations and memories for generations. But this story isn't about happily ever after. It's about a ruthless businessman, Daniel Collins, who buys the struggling bakery with one goal in mind: to tear it down and build luxury condos. Why would someone do that, you might wonder? After all, it's not every day you see a businessman so heartless, right? But hold on, the story doesn't end there. The owner's daughter, Abigail Hernandez, isn't going to let this happen without a fight. With determination and a deep love for her family's legacy, she challenges Daniel to a 30-day showdown, promising to prove the bakery's immeasurable worth to the community. Will she succeed? Will Daniel, the cold and calculating businessman, have a moment of redemption? Get ready for an emotional journey where heart clashes with profit and where a bakery is more than just a bakery, it's the soul of a town. And the best part? The story has a twist ending that you'd never expect. Stay tuned, because this tale is going to tug at your heartstrings and might even make you rethink what truly matters in life. In the quaint town of Willowbrook, nestled between rolling hills and a sparkling river, stood the much-loved local bakery, Sweet Redemption. Owned by the Hernandez family for generations, it was more than just a place to buy bread. It was a community, institution. But times had changed, and the bakery had fallen on hard times. Enter Daniel Collins, a high-flying real estate developer with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. He saw an opportunity to turn the struggling business into prime real estate. The plan: luxury condos that would attract the wealthy and revitalize the town's economy, or so he thought. Daniel's vision, however, clashed with the town's deep-seated attachment to their beloved bakery. For many, it was more than just a building. It was a symbol of their heritage and a place where memories were made. Despite the growing protests and heartfelt pleas from the locals, Daniel remained unmoved. He had a vision to build something grand, and nothing, not even the town's sentimental attachment, would stand in his way. But Daniel Collins wasn't just any businessman. He had built his empire on a foundation of calculated risks and cold calculations. His philosophy was simple: progress demanded sacrifice, and the old must give way to the new. As he signed the purchase agreement for the bakery, he couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. This was another conquest in his long list of successful projects. Yet, as he stood in the bakery, the air thick with the scent of stale bread and the whispers of the past, a tiny flicker of doubt began to stir within him. It was a feeling he quickly suppressed, chalking it up to the exhaustion of a busy day. After all, he had a reputation to uphold, a reputation as a man who knew exactly what he was doing. The townsfolk of Willowbrook were devastated when they heard about Daniel Collins' plans. They saw the bakery as a cherished part of their community, a place that had stood the test of time and brought people together through weddings, birthdays, and quiet afternoons. Abigail Hernandez, the spirited daughter of the bakery's owner, was especially heartbroken. She had grown up in the bakery, surrounded by the sweet scent of freshly baked bread and the warmth of family. When Daniel dismissed their concerns as mere sentimentality, the townspeople felt a deep sense of betrayal. They couldn't understand how someone could be so blind to the emotional weight the bakery carried. Daniel, on the other hand, saw the situation in purely financial terms. He believed that progress required sacrifice and that the old must give way to the new. He saw his vision of luxury condos as the future of Willowbrook, but the townspeople saw it as a loss of their history. Despite their pleas, Daniel remained resolute, convinced that the economic benefits would outweigh the emotional costs. The protests grew louder each day. Petitions circulated, town hall meetings turned into heated debates, and even the local newspaper ran editorials condemning Daniel's plans. Yet, Daniel brushed it all off with a dismissive smile. Sentimentality won't pay the bills, he would say, his voice cold and unyielding. But there was one person he hadn't counted on: Abigail Hernandez. With her fiery spirit and unwavering determination, she became the heart of the resistance. She organized bake sales, shared stories of the bakery's legacy on social media, and even started a hashtag campaign, Save Sweet Redemption. The more she fought, the more the community rallied behind her. And as Daniel watched from the sidelines, he couldn't help but admire her tenacity, even as he continued to dismiss her efforts as futile. Abigail Hernandez was not one to back down easily. When she heard about Daniel Collins's plans to replace her family's bakery with luxury condos, she knew she had to do something. She couldn't let the place where she had grown up, where her family had built countless memories, be torn down without a fight. Abigail confronted Daniel with a fierce determination that took him by surprise. She argued passionately about the bakery's significance to the community, but Daniel remained unmoved. Instead of giving in, Abigail proposed a bold idea: a 30-day grace period. She promised that she could prove the bakery's true worth to the community, and Daniel, intrigued by her audacity, agreed. She saw this as her chance to save the bakery and preserve the town's heritage. With a spark of hope in her heart, Abigail set to work, determined to show everyone, including Daniel, just how much the bakery meant to Willowbrook. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to fight for what she loved. After all, as her grandmother always said, a little flour and a lot of heart can work wonders. The 30-day grace period was more than just a tactical move. For Abigail, it was a lifeline. She threw herself into planning with the precision of a general preparing for battle. She reached out to the town's elders for their stories, collaborated with local artists to create window displays that showcased the bakery's history, and even persuaded the town's mayor to declare Bakery Heritage Week. Each day was meticulously planned to highlight a different aspect of the bakery's impact on the community. And as the days passed, Abigail noticed something unexpected. Daniel Collins, the man who had once seemed so unyielding, began to show up at the bakery more frequently. At first, he stood in the shadows, observing her efforts with a mix of curiosity and skepticism, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, his demeanor began to shift. The walls he had built around himself started to crack, revealing glimpses of a man who was perhaps not as heartless as he appeared. With the 30-day grace period secured, Abigail Hernandez was determined to prove that the bakery was more than just a building. It was the heart of the community. She knew that she had to do something extraordinary to show Daniel Collins and the townspeople the true value of the bakery. Each day, she baked a unique recipe tied to local memories and stories, hoping to remind everyone of the bakery's deep roots in the town's history. She called it her recipe for redemption. Abigail believed that by sharing the stories behind each recipe, she could evoke the same sense of community and love that had kept the bakery alive for generations. From Grandma's famous cinnamon rolls to the wedding cake that had graced hundreds of ceremonies, each treat was a piece of Willowbrook's heritage. She hoped that by sharing these stories, she could awaken the memories buried deep within the townspeople's hearts and minds. As she worked tirelessly in the bakery, Abigail couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose. She knew that she was fighting not just for the bakery, but for the soul of the town itself. With each batch of cookies and loaf of bread, she poured her heart and soul into her mission, determined to show everyone what it meant to truly belong to a community. One of Abigail's most impactful recipes was the legacy loaf, a sourdough bread that had been started with a starter passed down through 5 generations of the Hernandez family. She displayed the starter in a glass jar, explaining how it had been nurtured for over a century, a living connection to the past. The townspeople were moved by the symbolism, was as if the bread itself carried the essence of their ancestors. Daniel, who had come to the bakery that day out of curiosity, found himself strangely affected by the story. He listened as Abigail explained how the starter had survived wars, economic depressions, and personal tragedies, always finding a way to endure. It was a metaphor for the community itself, resilient and unbreakable. That day, Daniel bought a loaf of the legacy loaf, not just out of politeness, but because he genuinely wanted a piece of that history. As he took it home and shared it with his small circle of friends, he found himself telling the story of the starter and the Hernandez family. It was a small shift, but a significant one, a businessman sharing a story instead of a sales pitch. As the 30-day grace period began, Abigail Hernandez put her plan into action. Each day, she baked a unique recipe that was deeply tied to the local memories and stories of Willowbrook. She started with her grandmother's famous cinnamon rolls, the same ones that had brought comfort to generations of townspeople during hard times. The aroma of freshly baked cinnamon rolls filled the bakery, evoking memories of family gatherings and Sunday mornings. Next, she made the wedding cake that had graced hundreds of ceremonies, each slice a symbol of love and commitment. Abigail shared the stories behind each recipe, hoping to remind the townspeople of the bakery's significance. She spoke of how the bakery had hosted generations of birthdays, weddings, and farewells, each event a testament to the community's love and support. As she worked, Abigail felt a deep connection to her family's legacy. She knew that the bakery was more than just a place to buy bread. It was a sanctuary where memories were made and hearts were healed. With each batch of cookies and loaf of bread, she poured her heart and soul into her mission, determined to show everyone what it meant to truly belong to a community. As the days passed, the bakery began to buzz with activity, locals returning to share their own stories and connect with the town's heritage. Abigail couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as she watched the community rally around the bakery, proving that some things were worth fighting for. On the 7th day of the grace period, Abigail introduced Grandpa's apple pie, a recipe that had been her grandfather's specialty. She shared the story of how he had baked pies for the local veterans' home every Thanksgiving, a tradition that had continued even after his passing. The pie was simple but sublime, with a flaky crust and just the right balance of sweet and tart. The townspeople who tasted it that day were transported back to their childhoods, remembering the warm kitchens of their grandmothers and the comfort of family gatherings. Daniel Collins, who had become a somewhat regular visitor, found himself buying 2 piercons for himself and one to share with his assistant, who had grown up in Willowbrook. As they ate the pie together, his assistant shared her own memories of the bakery, stories that Daniel had never heard before. It was a reminder that the bakery's impact extended far beyond what he could see on the surface. That evening, Daniel went home and, for the first time in years, called his own mother. They spoke about his grandmother's bakery, and Daniel realized how much he had pushed those memories away in his pursuit of success. The conversation left him contemplative, a small but significant step toward understanding the power of legacy and community. Daniel Collins had always been a man of business, focused on the bottom line and the pursuit of profit. But as the days passed, something unexpected began to happen. Despite his initial dismissal of the bakery's sentimental value, Daniel found himself drawn back to sweet redemption more often than he cared to admit. At first, it was just curiosity. He wanted to see what Abigail Hernandez was up to understand why she believed so strongly in saving the bakery. But as he watched her work, saw the passion in her eyes, and listened to the stories she shared, he began to feel a strange stir within himself. It was as if the warmth of the bakery was seeping into his cold demeanor, thawing a part of him he hadn't even realized was frozen. Each visit brought him closer to the community, to the people who had lived and loved within those walls for generations. He saw the pride in their eyes as they shared memories, the joy as they tasted the familiar flavors of their childhood. Daniel couldn't explain it, but the bakery seemed to have a power all its own, a magic that drew people together and made them feel at home. Despite his best efforts to remain indifferent, he found himself looking forward to his visits, eager to see what Abigail would bake next and what story she would share. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time, a sense of belonging and connection that he had almost forgotten. As the days went by, Daniel began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was more to this old bakery than he had ever realized. One afternoon, as Daniel was leaving the bakery after a particularly heartfelt story from Abigail about a customer who had proposed to his girlfriend over a loaf of bread, he bumped into an old high school classmate. They hadn't spoken in years, but the shared connection to the bakery broke the ice. Over coffee and a slice of Abigail's latest creation, a lemon blueberry muffin that was the town's favorite in the 90s, they reminisced about their youth and how the bakery had been a constant presence in their lives. Daniel was surprised by how easily the conversation flowed, how the bakery became a bridge between their past and present. That evening, he found himself reflecting on the encounter. It wasn't just Abigail's efforts that were changing his perspective. It was the way the bakery brought people together, creating connections that transcended time and circumstance. He realized that in his pursuit of profit, he had underestimated the value of these intangible assets, the stories, the connections, the shared experiences that made a community thrive. It was a revelation that would continue to shape his thoughts. In the days to come, Abigail Hernandez's warmth and creativity were like a gentle but persistent force, chipping away at the coldness that had defined Daniel Collins for so long. With each visit to the bakery, Daniel found himself unable to resist the charm of its cozy atmosphere and the heartfelt stories that Abigail shared. He watched as she crafted each treat with love, her passion evident in every detail. Her creativity was infectious, and Daniel found himself drawn into her world, a world that was so different from his own. The bakery became a place of solace for him, a sanctuary where he could escape the pressures of his business and the relentless pursuit of profit. As he spent more time there, he began to see the bakery not just as a failing business, but as a living, breathing part of the community. Abigail's warmth had a way of making people feel at home, and Daniel was no exception. He found himself looking forward to his visits, eager to hear her latest story and taste her newest creation. Slowly but surely, the walls he had built around himself began to crumble, and he started to see the bakery and the people in it in a new light. It was a transformation that surprised him, but one that he couldn't deny. The more he saw of Abigail's dedication and the community's support, the more he realized that maybe, just maybe, there was something more important than profit. It was a revelation that would change him forever. During one of Abigail's baking demonstrations, she taught a group of children how to make cookies, her patience and joy evident as she guided their small hands. Daniel watched from the corner, struck by how natural she was with the kids, how she made baking seem like an adventure. It reminded him of his own childhood, of the few times he had helped his grandmother in her bakery. He had forgotten how simple pleasures could bring such joy. After the demonstration, one of the children approached Daniel, offering him a cookie with a shy smile. Taken aback, Daniel accepted it, and the child's innocent thanks, "This is the best day ever," hit him hard. It was a moment that seemed trivial, but carried immense weight. That evening, Daniel found himself thinking about that child's happiness and how it had come from something as simple as a cookie made with care. It was a small but powerful reminder of the impact the bakery had on people's lives, a reminder that began to reshape his priorities. As Daniel Collins spent more time at Sweet Redemption, he began to uncover the rich tapestry of memories that the bakery held. He learned how, for generations, the Hernandez family had been there for the town's most important moments. Birthdays, weddings, and farewells all had been celebrated within those walls. One day, Abigail showed him a dusty old photo album filled with snapshots of past events. There were pictures of children with messy faces from birthday cupcakes, couples cutting their wedding cakes, and parents bidding farewell to their children as they left for college. Each photo told a story, each moment captured in time, a testament to the bakery's role as the heart of the community. Daniel listened as Abigail shared tales of how her grandmother had baked late into the night to prepare for a last-minute wedding order, or how her father had comforted a grieving widow with a warm loaf of bread. It was through these stories that Daniel began to understand the true value of the bakery. It wasn't just a place to buy bread, it was a place where people came together, where memories were made, and where the community found solace and joy. The more he learned, the more he realized that the bakery was more than just a business, it was a legacy, a living history that connected the past to the present. And as Daniel sat in the bakery, surrounded by these stories and memories, he felt a strange sense of connection to a place he had once dismissed as insignificant. One story that particularly moved Daniel was about a man named Mr. Thompson, a World War II veteran who had visited the bakery every Tuesday for over 50 years. He would order the same thing, a slice of chess pie and a cup of black coffee. Abigail explained that Mr. Thompson had lost his wife during the war and had never remarried. The bakery had become his anchor, a place where he could remember happier times. When he passed away, his family requested that his ashes be scattered in front of the bakery, a final nod to the place that had been his sanctuary. Daniel was deeply touched by this tale of loyalty and loss. It made him think of his own grandmother and how her bakery had served a similar purpose for their family and community. He realized that the bakery wasn't just a business. It was a testament to human resilience and the need for connection. This realization struck him with such force that he found himself visiting Mr. Thompson's simple memorial outside the bakery, reflecting on the impact one place could have on so many lives. During one of his late-night visits to the bakery, Daniel Collins found himself opening up to Abigail Hernandez in a way he never had before. Perhaps it was the warmth of the fireside or the comfort of the familiar surroundings, but something compelled him to share a part of himself he had long kept hidden. He told her about his grandmother, who had also owned a bakery in a small town much like Willowbrook. Daniel's eyes softened as he spoke of the joy that bakery had brought to his childhood, the aroma of freshly baked bread that had always welcomed him home. But his voice carried a note of pain as he recounted how the bakery had been taken from her by a developer who cared only for profit. That event had shaped Daniel's worldview, hardening his heart against the sentimental value of such places. He had sworn that he would never let himself be vulnerable to such loss again, that he would focus solely on the bottom line. But as he shared this story with Abigail, he realized how much that loss had affected him, how it had driven him to become the man he was today. It was a moment of unexpected connection between two people who had once been adversaries. Abigail listened with a heavy heart as Daniel shared his story, her own experiences mirroring his in ways she hadn't anticipated. She reached out and gently placed her hand on his, a small gesture of comfort that surprised them both. In that moment, the adversarial dynamic between them shifted. They were no longer just opposites in a battle over the bakery. They were two people who understood the weight of loss and the pain of having something cherished taken away. Daniel found himself opening up more, speaking of how his grandmother's bakery had been not just a business, but a source of pride and joy for their family. He admitted that the memory of her bakery had always been bittersweet for him, a reminder of what could be lost if one wasn't careful. Abigail nodded, understanding deeply, as her family's bakery had faced similar threats over the years. This shared vulnerability created a bond between them, one that transcended their initial conflict. It was the beginning of a mutual respect and perhaps something deeper. Abigail listened intently as Daniel Collins shared his grandmother's story, her heart aching at the pain he had carried for so long. She could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the raw emotion that he had tried so hard to bury beneath his tough exterior. It was in that moment that Abigail realized just how much their situations mirrored each other. Daniel's grandmother had lost her bakery to a developer who cared only for profit, just as Daniel had planned to do to her family's bakery. But now, as Daniel faced the consequences of his own actions, he was beginning to see the world through a different lens. The pain of his grandmother's loss had driven him to become the man he was, but it had also blinded him to the very same sentiments that the townspeople of Willowbrook held for sweet redemption. Abigail could see that this realization was dawning on Daniel, that he was starting to understand the depth of the community's attachment to the bakery. It was a turning point, a moment where Daniel's perspective began to shift from profit to purpose, from progress to preservation. As they sat together in the bakery, the weight of their shared history hung in the air, creating a bond that neither could ignore. Abigail knew that this was just the beginning, that Daniel was on the brink of a transformative change, one that could save the bakery and heal the rift between him and the town. And as she looked into his eyes, she saw not just a businessman, but a man who was finally beginning to find his humanity. The next day, Daniel arrived at the bakery with an old leather-bound recipe book that had belonged to his grandmother. He handed it to Abigail, explaining that his grandmother had always believed in the healing power of baking. She used to say that every recipe tells a story and every story deserves to be remembered, he said, his voice tinged with emotion. Abigail opened the book to find handwritten recipes, each accompanied by a brief note about the memory it evoked: a celebration, a hardship overcome, a family gathering. Touched by the gesture, Abigail decided to integrate some of these recipes into the bakery's offerings, honoring Daniel's grandmother's legacy alongside her own family's. The townspeople were deeply moved by this act of reconciliation, seeing it as a symbol of Daniel's growing commitment to the bakery's preservation. It became a turning point in the community's perception of him, transforming him from an antagonist into someone who was actively working to heal old wounds. For Daniel, it was a step toward redemption, a way to right the wrongs of the past and build a new future, one that honored both his grandmother's memory and the Hernandez family's legacy. One morning, Abigail Hernandez did something unexpected. She invited Daniel Collins to help with the baking. At first, Daniel was taken aback. He had always seen himself as a man of business, not a baker. But there was something in Abigail's earnest request that he couldn't refuse. Reluctantly, he agreed. As they worked side by side, Daniel was surprised by how much he enjoyed the process. There was something therapeutic about measuring ingredients, kneading dough, and shaping it into loaves. The rhythm of the work was calming, a stark contrast to the high-pressure world he was used to. And then there was the joy on Abigail's face as she baked, the way her eyes lit up when she pulled a fresh batch of cookies out of the oven. It was infectious. Daniel found himself laughing as they shared stories, his guard lowering with each passing moment. The bakery, with its warm atmosphere and the scent of freshly baked bread, felt like a world away from his cold office. As the day went on, Daniel realized that this was more than just a task. It was a connection to Abigail, to the community, and to a part of himself he had forgotten. By the end of the day, he had not only helped bake, but had also discovered a new sense of purpose. It was a small step, but one that would lead to a profound change in his life. As Daniel became more involved in the baking process, he discovered a natural aptitude for it. His hands, once only accustomed to shaking deals and turning soil at groundbreaking ceremonies, proved steady and skilled as he learned to shape dough into perfect loaves. Abigail, noticing his growing confidence, challenged him to create his own signature recipe. Daniel, never one to back down from a challenge, threw himself into the task. After several attempts and a few laughable failures, a batch of cookies that spread into a single giant pancake, a loaf of bread that rose unevenly, he finally crafted a delicious chocolate chip cookie studded with sea salt and dark chocolate chunks. The townspeople loved it, and it quickly became a bestseller. Daniel named it the Redemption Cookie, a subtle nod to both the bakery's name and his own journey. The success of the cookie boosted his confidence and deepened his connection to the bakery. It was a tangible symbol of his transformation, a sweet reminder of how far he had come from the man who had intended to tear it all down. As the 30-day grace period continued, the bakery began to buzz with activity once again. Locals, drawn by Abigail's efforts and the growing buzz around the bakery's potential salvation, started returning in droves. They came not just for the bread, but to share their own stories of the bakery's impact on their lives. One elderly woman spoke of how the bakery had been the site of her first date with her late husband, the smell of fresh bread still evoking memories of their early romance. A young mother told of how her children had learned to bake their first cookies there, guided by Abigail's patient hands. Each story was a testament to the bakery's significance, a reminder of how it had woven itself into the fabric of the community. For Daniel Collins, these stories were a revelation. They stirred something deep within him, something he had buried beneath years of chasing profit and success. He remembered his grandmother's bakery and the joy it had brought to her customers. He remembered the warmth and community that had once been a part of his own life. As he listened to the townspeople's stories, he felt a growing sense of belonging, a connection to a place and people he had once seen as just another business opportunity. It was as if the walls he had built around his heart were slowly crumbling, revealing a vulnerability he hadn't known he possessed. The more he listened, the more he realized that some things were worth fighting for, not just for profit, but for the sake of community and legacy. One afternoon, a man in his late 60s entered the bakery, his eyes scanning the room until they settled on Daniel. With a hesitant smile, he approached and introduced himself as Mr. Bennett, a former customer of Daniel's grandmother's bakery. He shared a story about how, during the Great Depression, Daniel's grandmother had allowed him and his family to trade firewood for bread when they couldn't afford to pay. "Your grandmother saved our family from starvation," Mr. Bennett said, his voice choked with emotion. "And now you're here, ready to tear down this bakery. It breaks my heart." The weight of this personal connection to his grandmother's legacy hit Daniel like a tidal wave. He realized that by saving the Hernandez bakery, he wasn't just preserving a building, he was honoring his grandmother's memory and the values she had lived by. Mr. Bennett's story became a catalyst for Daniel's transformation. He began to see the bakery not just as a symbol of Willowbrook's heritage, but as a living link to his own family's past. It was a powerful reminder that legacy was not just about what you built, but also about what you preserved. As the 30-day grace period drew to a close, the pressure on Daniel Collins intensified. His investors, eager for the promised returns on their investment in the luxury condo project, were growing increasingly impatient. They had put their faith and money into Daniel's vision of transforming the struggling bakery into a profitable real estate venture. They didn't care about the community's attachment to the bakery or the memories it held. They cared about the bottom line. Daniel found himself caught between two worlds, the world of business, where profit was king, and the world he had begun to rediscover at the bakery, where community and legacy mattered. The investors' demands for action became more urgent with each passing day, their messages filled with threats of pulling out if the project didn't move forward. Daniel knew he had to make a decision, but the weight of that decision was heavier than he had ever anticipated. He had grown attached to the bakery and the people in it, but he couldn't ignore the obligations he had to his investors. As the deadline loomed, Daniel felt the walls closing in on him. He spent sleepless nights weighing his options, torn between his duty to his business and the growing connection he felt to the bakery and its community. It was a conflict that gnawed at him, leaving him feeling more uncertain than he had in years. But in the quiet moments between his work and his visits to the bakery, Daniel began to see a glimmer of a different pathon that could honor both the town's heritage and his obligations. It was a path that would require courage, but it was one that he was beginning to consider. The final week of the grace period was a battleground of emotions for Daniel. Each day brought a new crisis, investors calling for meetings, townspeople staging peaceful protests outside his temporary office in Willowbrook, and Abigail's unwavering determination to save the bakery. One investor in particular, a wealthy businessman from the city, threatened to sue if Daniel didn't proceed with the demolition immediately. The legal implications and potential financial losses loomed large, adding another layer of stress to an already impossible situation. Yet amidst the chaos, Daniel found moments of clarity in the bakery. He would steal away there during his lunch breaks, finding solace in the familiar rituals of baking. It was during one of these breaks that he overheard a conversation between two elderly townspeople discussing how the bakery had been the site of their wedding reception 50 years prior. Their eyes still sparkled with love as they reminisced, and Daniel realized that the bakery's value was incalculable. It was woven into the very fabric of people's lives in ways that no luxury condo ever could be. This realization became a beacon of hope amidst the storm of pressure, guiding him toward a decision that would honor both his investors and the community. On the final day of the 30-day grace period, Daniel Collins walked through the bakery one last time, his footsteps heavy with emotion. The familiar scent of freshly baked bread filled the air, and the warm glow of the afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting a golden light over everything. As he moved through the space, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey he had been on. He had come to the bakery with a singular purpose to turn it into luxury condos. But now, as he looked around, he saw it through different eyes. He saw the countless memories etched into every corner, the stories that had been shared over loaves of bread and cups of coffee. He thought of Abigail and the passion she had shown in fighting to save the bakery, of the townspeople who had rallied around it, and of his own growing connection to this place. Daniel's heart was heavy with the weight of the decision he had to make. He knew that choosing to proceed with the condo project would mean destroying something precious, something that had become a part of him in ways he couldn't have imagined. But he also knew that choosing to save the bakery would mean facing the disappointment of his investors and risking his reputation as a ruthless businessman. As he stood in the bakery, torn between these two paths, Daniel felt a profound sense of uncertainty. He wondered if he had the courage to make the choice that his heart was now telling him was right. It was a moment of intense introspection, a moment where Daniel Collins, the man who had always known exactly what to do, found himself at a crossroads. The answer, he realized, wouldn't come easily, but it would define him in ways he could scarcely imagine. As Daniel stood in the bakery, a small crowd had gathered outside, their faces pressed against the windows in anticipation. Among them was Abigail, her eyes locked onto his, filled with a mix of hope and fear. She had spent the past month pouring her soul into this fight, and now everything rested on Daniel's decision. Inside, Daniel's mind raced. He thought of his grandmother's bakery, of the joy it had brought and the pain of its loss. He thought of the Hernandez family's legacy and the countless stories he had heard in this very space. The investors' voices echoed in his head, demanding profit and progress, but they were increasingly drowned out by the quieter, more persistent voices of the townspeople and Abigail. With a deep breath, Daniel made his decision. He walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped outside, meeting the eyes of the waiting crowd. What he said next would change the course of Willowbrook's future and his own. The day of the public announcement arrived, and the townspeople of Willowbrook gathered outside the town hall, their hearts heavy with anticipation. Among them was Abigail Hernandez, who had poured her soul into fighting for the bakery over the past 30 days. She stood there, a mix of hope and fear in her eyes, wondering if Daniel Collins would honor his initial plan, or if there was a chance, just a chance, that he might change his mind. As Daniel stepped up to the microphone, the crowd fell silent. His presence was imposing, yet there was a new softness in his demeanor. He began by acknowledging the community's attachment to the bakery and the memories it held. He spoke of the stories he had heard, the connections he had witnessed, and the profound impact the bakery had on the town. Then, with a deep breath, he revealed his decision. To the astonishment of everyone present, Daniel announced that he was canceling the luxury condo project. The words hung in the air, met with a mixture of disbelief and joy. He had chosen the bakery over profit, community, over progress. It was a moment of triumph for Abigail and the townspeople, but it was also a moment of transformation for Daniel. By making this decision, he had not only saved the bakery, but had also taken the first step toward redeeming himself in the eyes of the community. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Daniel's gaze was fixed on Abigail, whose eyes shone with tears of gratitude. He knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where the bakery's legacy would continue to thrive. The aftermath of Daniel's announcement was a whirlwind of emotions. Reporters from neighboring towns descended on Willowbrook, eager to cover the story of the businessman who had chosen community over profit. Daniel, now thrust into the spotlight, handled the media with a newfound grace, redirecting attention to the bakery and its rich history. Abigail, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, organized a celebration at the bakery that evening. The event was a heartfelt gathering, with neighbors sharing stories, laughter, and tears. Daniel stood somewhat awkwardly at the edge of the crowd, feeling out of place, yet undeniably connected. As Abigail approached him with a plate of her famous cinnamon rolls, she smiled and said, "Welcome to the community, Daniel." Her words were simple, but carried immense weight. They marked his official transition from outsider to insider, from adversary to ally. It was a moment of acceptance that Daniel would cherish, a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories come not from what you build, but from what you choose to preserve. With his decision to cancel the luxury condo project, Daniel Collins embarked on a new journey, one of restoration and redemption. He invested his resources not in demolishing the bakery, but in restoring it to its former glory and beyond. The renovation was a labor of love, with every detail carefully considered to honor the Hernandez family's legacy while breathing new life into the space. Daniel worked closely with Abigail, whose knowledge of the family's history and the community's needs proved invaluable. Together, they preserved the bakery's charming rustic elements while adding modern touches to attract a new generation of customers. As the bakery began to take shape, Daniel found himself rediscovering a joy he had not felt in years. The act of creation, of building something that would benefit the community and honor his grandmother's memory, was profoundly fulfilling. The townspeople, once wary of him, gradually began to accept Daniel as part of their community. They saw his genuine commitment to preserving the bakery's legacy and his growing bond with Abigail. The reopening of Sweet Redemption was a celebration that brought the entire town together. It was a testament to the power of community, the importance of preserving heritage, and the possibility of redemption. For Daniel, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where profit and purpose could coexist and where the past and future could be woven together in harmony. As he stood in the restored bakery, surrounded by the familiar aromas and the laughter of the townspeople, Daniel finally understood that true success wasn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the connections we make and the legacies we leave behind. The restored bakery became a symbol of resilience and renewal for Willowbrook. Daniel's investment extended beyond the physical space. He established a scholarship fund in honor of Abigail's father, aimed at supporting local students pursuing careers in culinary arts. He also created a community kitchen within the bakery, where residents could take cooking classes, ensuring that the traditions of the Hernandez family would continue to be passed down. The bakery's menu now included recipes from both the Hernandez family and Daniel's grandmother, creating a unique fusion that honored both legacies. Business flourished, not just because of the quality of the products, but because of the story behind them, a story of redemption, community, and the power of second chances. Daniel found himself fully integrated into the town's life, attending community events, joining a local book club, and even coaching the youth soccer team. The transformation was complete. The Ruthless businessman had become a beloved community member. And in this new role, Daniel discovered a joy that no amount of money could buy, a joy rooted in connection, purpose, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that he had made a positive difference in the lives of others. And so, the Sweet Redemption didn't just survive, it became a symbol of hope and renewal for Willowbrook. Daniel Collins' decision to preserve and restore the bakery instead of building luxury condos did more than save a building. It rebuilt the community's trust and reignited precious memories. The story of Daniel and Abigail shows that even the coldest hearts can be warmed by the community's warmth and the power of forgiveness. Now we want to hear from you. What did you think of Daniel Collins' journey? Which moment impacted you the most? Did you expect a different ending, or did you like the one presented? Don't forget to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this inspiring story, remember to follow our channel so you don't miss any of the upcoming videos. Until next time.